Arabian Nights from Arabian and we're up to Aladdin and his wonderful lamp. Long ago there lived in a far-off land a poor widow and her only son whose name was Aladdin. They never had enough to eat and never knew where the next meal would come from. But Aladdin, in spite of his poverty, was very handsome and clever and meant to make his fortune some day. One day he wandered to the richer part of the city in which he lived. In the distance he could see the towers of the Sultan's palace. "How fine it looks," he said to himself. "I can show you something much finer," a voice said at his side. Aladdin looked up to see a bearded stranger standing beside him. "Who are you?" he asked. "A friend," said the stranger. "Come with me, and I will show you more wonders than you have dreamed of." Aladdin, who was always ready for an adventure, was quite willing to go with the stranger. For many miles he followed him until they had left the town far behind. Then, when they had reached a quiet valley, the stranger stopped. "Now," he said, "if you will gather some dry sticks, I will light a fire." Aladdin set to work gathering sticks, and soon the stranger had a fire burning. When it was blazing up, to Aladdin's surprise, he threw some perfume on it. Then he spoke some strange words, and the fire flared to such a height that Aladdin began to feel afraid. For a moment he thought of taking to his heels and running away, but just then the ground beneath them shook, and a large stone with a brass ring fixed onto it came into sight. Said the stranger to the magician. "Now I want you to do something for me." Aladdin, though very alarmed, said he was ready to do what he could. "Then pull up that stone by the ring," ordered the magician. Aladdin took the ring and was surprised to find that he could lift the stone without any effort. "Now I want you to go down that well," said the magician. "When you reach the bottom, go through the door into a large hall. You must go through many of these halls, one after the other, keeping a straight course. Then you will come to a place where you will find a lamp hanging on the wall. Bring the lamp to me." When he had given his orders, the magician put a ring on Aladdin's finger, saying, "This will keep you from harm." There was nothing else for Aladdin to do but obey him. So he went down the well and found everything as he had been told. The halls were there, and there was also lovely gardens with strange fruits of all colours, red and white and blue, which were really jewels of great value. At last Aladdin reached the hall where an old lamp was burning on the wall. He put out the flame and carried the lamp back to the foot of the well. On the way he picked some of the strange fruit from the trees. "Have you got the lamp?" asked the stranger as Aladdin came up the steps. "Give it to me and you'll be able to get out more easily." But Aladdin did not like the sound of this. He thought it best not to trust a stranger too much. So he said, "No, help me out first and then I will give you the lamp." The stranger argued and threatened, but Aladdin would not give up the lamp. So at last the magician threw some more perfume on the fire and again said some magic words. At once he vanished and the stone flew back into its place, leaving Aladdin shut in. Aladdin did not know what to do. He went down to the foot of the well and stayed there for 2 days without eating or drinking. On the third day, when he had given up all hope of seeing the world again, he joined his hands together to say a prayer. As he did so, he chanced to rub the ring which the stranger had put on his finger. The next moment, to his surprise, a slave stood before him. "What are your orders, master?" he asked. "I am the slave of him who has a magic ring on his finger." There was only one thing Aladdin wanted at that moment. "Take me out of this place," he begged. At once he found himself on the spot where the fire had been. He felt the fresh breeze on his face once more, and it seemed as if he had come alive after being buried for 3 days. As fast as he could, he ran home to his mother, who was mourning his loss. She was delighted to see her son again, and very surprised to hear of his adventures. Next morning he rose and asked for his breakfast, but, alas, there was no food in the house. "If you'll wait a little, my son," said his mother, "I will try to sell some cotton on the spun, and then we can buy food." "No," said Aladdin, "keep your cotton, mother, and I will sell this lamp instead," for he still had the lamp with him. "It will fetch a better price if I clean it," said the widow. With that she began to rub the lamp. The next moment a slave stood before her. "What is your wish?" he asked. "I am the slave of the lamp." The poor widow was so surprised that she could not speak. But Aladdin said in a firm voice, "We are hungry. Bring us something to eat." In a moment the table was spread with dishes of gold and silver filled with good things to eat. "What is the meaning of this?" cried the widow. "Has the Sultan taken pity on us and sent them?" Aladdin tried to explain to his mother about the magic ring and the lamp. "Put the lamp away, my son," she said in fear. "It will do no good." No, mother, who knows, it might yet make my fortune. So the two of them sat down and had the finest meal of their lives. Enough food was left to last them for several days. When that was gone, Aladdin sold one of the silver plates, and with the money bought more food. This went on for some time. As soon as food was needed, another dish was sold. With some of the money, Aladdin bought fine clothes to wear and looked very handsome now that he was no longer in rags. One day, while walking near the palace, he saw the beautiful daughter of the Sultan. "How pretty she is," he said to himself. "I should like to marry her." That night he told his mother that he wanted to wed the princess. "You must go and ask the Sultan," he said. "I?" cried his mother in surprise. "Not I, indeed." "Then I shall die," said Aladdin. He begged so hard that at last his mother gave in. "Very well, my son, I will go," she said. "But those who ask favours always give presents. What shall I take to the Sultan?" Aladdin suddenly thought of the jewels which he had picked from the magic gardens. He brought them out and laid them in rows on the table, where they sparkled so brightly that they almost blinded the widow. "Here is a rich present for the Sultan," he said. "Take them to him, and I am sure he will give you what you want." So the poor woman filled a basket full of jewels and set out for the Sultan's palace. The Sultan was holding his court. All the great men of the land were with him, and the greatest of all, his Prime Minister, was at his side. "What is your wish, my good woman?" asked the Sultan. "I dare not tell you in front of all these people," said the widow, trembling. "Then have the court cleared," ordered the Sultan. When all the people had gone, except the Prime Minister, the Sultan turned to her and said kindly, "Now tell me what you want." "Pardon, please," said he. "Be bold and speak out." So the widow told how her son had fallen in love with the princess and wished to marry her, and there she ended, showing him her basket. "It is a present from my son." The Sultan was dazzled for a moment. Never had he seen such rare jewels. "What think you of this?" he said, turning to the Prime Minister. "Must not he who sends such a fine present be worthy of my daughter?" But the Prime Minister wanted his own son to marry the princess, so he stepped up to the Sultan and whispered in his ear. The Sultan nodded his head and spoke to the woman. "I cannot give my daughter to anyone unless I know him to be a really wealthy man. But tell your son that he may wed the princess if he can send me 40 large basins of pure gold, full of the same jewels you have already given me. These are the terms. Go and tell your son." When the widow reached home, she said, "All hope is gone, my son. The Sultan has set her price." But when Aladdin heard the terms, he did not despair. "Perhaps the slave of the lamp will help me," he said. He took up the lamp, rubbed it, and the slave stood before him. "What is your wish, O master?" he asked with a bow. Aladdin gave his orders, and at once there appeared at the door 40 slaves bearing 40 gold basins filled with jewels. "My dear mother," said Aladdin, "there is no time to lose. Go to the palace at once, and tell the Sultan I have obeyed his commands." The Sultan was amazed and delighted when the rich presents reached him. He would not listen to any more of the Prime Minister's advice, but said, "Go, my good woman, and tell your son that I am waiting to welcome him. He may come and claim the hand of the princess as soon as he pleases." Aladdin danced with joy when he heard the good news. Again he rubbed the magic lamp and ordered the slave to bring him rich clothes and the best horse in the kingdom. No sooner was the order given than he found himself dressed in a robe so rich and handsome that he looked finer than the Sultan himself. A high-bred horse with flashing jewels on the saddle and bridle awaited him. Aladdin mounted and set off to the palace in high spirits. The Sultan was delighted to welcome so handsome and fine a young man. The princess, too, was pleased to see him, and soon they were making plans for the wedding to take place. "There is a large open space before my palace," said the Sultan. "Take that and build a house on it for you and the princess to live in." Aladdin went home, called the slave of the lamp, and ordered him to build a house of precious stones in front of the palace. That same night the house was built. It rose in the air, its rooms one above the other. Every wall sparkled and shone, and all the furniture was of pure gold and pearls. The Sultan was amazed when he looked out of the palace window next morning and saw it there. "This is no ordinary young man," he thought. "My daughter is lucky to have won his love." And so Aladdin and the princess were married and lived happily together. They loved each other dearly and lived in great comfort in their fine house. But sad to say, their happiness did not last. The magician who had taken Aladdin to the well began to wonder what had become of the magical lamp. When he heard how Aladdin had become a rich man and married the princess, he was very angry. He came to the Sultan's city and saw the fine house where Aladdin lived. He knew that the lamp was somewhere inside it. I must get it back, he thought, and made his way to an old man who sold lamps. I want a dozen copper lamps, he said. The man who sold him the lamps, and he carried them around the city crying, "Who will change old lamps for new?" When he reached Aladdin's house, the princess was sitting at the window spinning with her maidens. They laughed when they heard him. "Surely he has lost his senses to offer new lamps for old ones." Then the princess remembered that Aladdin had an old lamp in his room. She sent one of her maidens for it. "Take it to the man," she said, "and see if he really means what he says." The magician was delighted when he held the magic lamp once more in his hands. He gave the maiden a pretty new one for it, and then hurried away to a quiet street. There he rubbed the lamp, and the slave stood before him, saying, "What is your wish, O master?" "I command you to take up Aladdin's house and carry it with me and all that is in it to Africa." At once his orders were obeyed, and the fine house vanished from its place in front of the palace. When the Sultan looked out and saw that it was gone, he was overcome with rage and grief. "Alas," he cried, "my poor daughter is gone. Where is the wretch who asked her for a wife? I will strike off his head." "He's been away at the hunt these 2 days," said one of his servants. "Then send 30 horsemen to drag him back," ordered the Sultan. The horsemen set out into the forest and found Aladdin. When they dragged him before the Sultan, he asked, "What have I done, sire, to vex you?" "Where is my dear daughter?" cried the Sultan, "and where is the house you built for her?" Aladdin looked through the window and was struck dumb with horror when he saw that his house was not there. "Sire," he pleaded, "the house is indeed gone, but I have no hand in it. Pray give me 40 days to search for the princess. If I cannot find her at the end of that time, kill me." At last the Sultan consented, and Aladdin sadly left the city. High and low he searched for his missing princess, but he could find no trace of her. At last he was crossing a river. He slipped and happened to the ring he wore. At once a slave stood before him. "What is your wish, master?" he said. "Welcome, dear slave," cried Aladdin. "Why did I not think of you before? Save me by taking me back to the palace and my dear wife." "What you ask is not in my power," said the slave. "I am only the slave of the ring. You must ask the slave of the lamp. At least take me to the spot where my house is and place me under the princess's window," begged Aladdin. No sooner had he spoken than the slave lifted him up, bore him to Africa, and placed him under a window of his house. Overjoyed, Aladdin called to the princess, who opened the window and wept with delight when she saw him. She showed him a secret door through which he entered her room. Soon they were embracing each other fondly. Then they formed their plans together. Next day Aladdin went into the city and bought a powerful drug which he asked the princess to put in the magician's wine at supper that night. The princess did as she was bid, and as soon as the magician drank the wine, he fell into deep sleep and woke up. She found the magic lamp in his pocket and hurried with it to Aladdin, who was overjoyed to see it again. In an instant he called the slave of the lamp and ordered him to transport his house to its place in front of the palace. Great was the joy of the Sultan when he saw he was safe and well. "My son," he said to Aladdin, "forgive my hurt to you. All is now well, and we live for the rest of our lives in peace." His words came true, and his lovely princess had no more cause to fear the wicked magician. All went well with them, and they were happy each day passed. And that is the end of that installment, and also the end of Arabian Nights, so there will be no more Arabian Nights stories. Hope you've enjoyed them.